Legacy Precious Metals is the company that I trust to give you good and patient counsel for investing in your retirement. The Biden administration has caused a financial crisis, and they have no clue how to fix it. Oil prices have skyrocketed, and when oil prices go up, not only do your expenses go up, but the cost of transportation and shipping spikes, leading the prices of goods to rise. And we are already seeing record inflation. That's the last thing that we need. Our economy is in trouble, and you need to take steps to protect yourself. If all your money is tied up in stocks, bonds, and traditional markets, you may be vulnerable. So gold is one of the very best ways to protect your retirement. No matter what happens, you own your own gold. It's real, it's physical, and it's always been valuable since the dawn of time. Call Legacy Precious Metals today at 866-528-1903 or visit them online at legacypminvestments.com. That's legacypminvestments.com, where you can download the free investor's guide. You can also go to my Facebook page, Jenna Ellis. I am a public figure on Facebook, and I just posted yesterday a really great interview with the president of Legacy Precious Metals, who is discussing why you need to start your retirement account even if you're in your 20s or 30s. There is always a great time to protect your retirement and invest, just like you want to protect your health over the long term. So go to Legacy Precious Metals at legacypminvestments.com or call 866-528-1903. Americans are feeling the pressure of inflation, bad government policies, and an increase in violent crimes, and we're all feeling a little powerless. Well, listen up, because AMAC, the Association of Mature American Citizens, is here to help. AMAC is the benefit program for conservative American seniors, and AMAC advocates for conservative values. An AMAC membership provides countless discounts and benefits on things like hotels, restaurants, cell phone plans to alleviate the pain of inflation. They also offer advisory services on Medicare, financial planning, and Social Security. And while you are saving money, AMAC Action is working to help save America. AMAC Action fights to hold lawmakers on Capitol Hill accountable and to ensure that House Republicans capitalize on their upcoming majority. So becoming a member of AMAC is easy. Anyone can join for just $16 a year. Do something good for yourself and for America. Go to amac.us/Ellis. That's amac.us/ELLIS. Join millions of other freedom-loving Americans and start saving today at amac.us/Ellis. That's amac.us/ELLIS.
As a constitutional law attorney, former senior legal advisor, and personal counsel to President Donald J. Trump, Jenna Ellis believes in the rule of law and the importance of integrity in our elections. And she's ready to tackle the big cultural and legal issues facing America. This is the Jenna Ellis Show. Here is your host, Jenna Ellis.
Well, welcome to the Jenna Ellis Show. I will be your host, Ryan Helfenbein, Executive Director of the Standing for Freedom Center at Liberty University, and it is such an honor. I hope that many of our listeners enjoyed Christmas. I hope all of you, not just many of you, but all of you enjoyed Christmas as we head towards a new year in 2023. I want to tell you that I'm especially hopeful for this country and especially for the church in America. It is time to stand strong for the gospel of Jesus Christ. And I want to tell you that I am thrilled, I am honored to have on an evangelical luminary and legend, Dr. Erwin Lutzer, former senior pastor of the Moody Church in Chicago. He was the senior pastor there for over 36 years, and he has authored, I think over 40 books, he'll tell us, but so many. Most recently, No Reason to Hide, Standing for Christ in a Collapsing Culture. Dr. Lutzer, welcome to the Jenna Ellis Show.
I'm so glad to be with you, and you're absolutely right. We're living, though, in a revolutionary period of American history. I think we all have to admit that. And that's why I wrote the book that you referenced, No Reason to Hide. Ryan, can I just take out a moment and explain to the people why I wrote the book?
Absolutely. Let's start there.
I looked at the various issues that the Church of Jesus Christ was facing today, and I know that we have to think through biblically what our response to them should be. So, for example, I talk about cultural demonization, how unless you're on board, and I hope we can explore that a little bit, because it used to be, Ryan, as you well know, that if you had a degree in chemistry and you were a good professor, you could get a job as a Christian. But now you can't unless you sign on that you are comfortable with multiple pronouns, unless you go along with the spirit of the times in terms of the LGBTQ community, and on and on. So it is not competency anymore that determines whether or not you go up the ladder, but loud enthusiasm to the agenda, the woke agenda. So I discussed that. I discussed the cancel culture, of course, but then also one of the longest chapters has to do with diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I show how that actually works against us rather than for us as we think about race relations. Also, whether or not we should feel guilty that we are on stolen land. But then I go also, I don't know if you got this far in the book, Ryan, but one of my greatest interests has to do with propaganda. So I have a chapter on how propaganda is used. And remember that the purpose of propaganda is to so shape people's view of reality that even when confronted with a mountain of evidence, they will not change their minds. And I discussed in the book how this is done through hatred, through fear, if you step out of line. And so we're living at a time like that. And then, of course, I want to help parents also to know how to answer their children if they come home from school and say, you know, Mom and Dad, I think I'm transgender. So I have a chapter on that. And of course, education, the Great Reset. But here's the thing, Ryan, this is so critical for people to understand. We did not ask for this culture war. The culture war has come to us, and there's no way we can avoid it. There's no way we can run from it. We have to confront it, but we have to do so biblically. And that's the purpose of the book, No Reason to Hide.
Excellent, excellent. Well, Dr. Lutzer, I do want to say this, because I want to dive into the book. But before we do, I want to give this audience just a little bit of biographical background into your story. I just want to just briefly talk about Chicago, talk about Moody Church, your time there. I think it's one of those things, I have a great deal of respect for you. I was a seminary student years ago. I was actually at a pastor's conference with R. Albert Mohler, Dr. Mohler, who hosts the briefing. I was a student at the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary. Had an incredible opportunity that I will never forget, has a great deal of meaning to me, and that's just to go and walk around with you around Moody Church, such a historic church there in the great city of Chicago. And you took me on a tour, and Dr. Mohler, and then also I think we walked around Chicago as well. But I just want to hear a little bit about you, give our audience just a little bit of background.
Sure. Now, actually, I don't know if you know this, Ryan, but I was born in Canada. I was born in Saskatchewan, Canada, became a great fan of Billy Graham early on, and maybe we'll have an opportunity to talk about that later in the show, but through the providence of God. And that's why my autobiography is entitled, He Will Be the Preacher. Because Ryan, when I was a baby sleeping in a crib, the pastor's wife came over and said to my mother in German, he will be the preacher. Now, I don't know if that was just an arbitrary comment or whatever. Of course, I didn't know her. She died shortly after. But interestingly, her comment turned out to be true. So anything that I have, I owe to God. So through a string of providences, I became the pastor of Moody Church in Chicago, officially in 1980, and had the privilege of being there for 36 years. Now, Moody Church was founded in about 1864 by Dwight L. Moody, the great D.L. Moody. It is about 23 years older than Moody Bible Institute. So the Institute was formed later. They are totally separate organizations, but of course we cooperate, we work together. But so Moody Church has had a continuous history in the city of Chicago for well over 150 years. And even after the Chicago fire, where the original church burned down, they had temporary quarters where they were giving out clothes and food and so forth. And we tried to do a study of this, and we know of no point at which the church ceased to minister or to help people or to preach the gospel. So as I stood in the pulpit there, and by the way, the present building was dedicated in 1925, so Moody didn't preach there. He died in 1899. But as I stood there for 36 years, preaching virtually every Sunday, of course, there were vacations and so forth, I could not ever get used to the fact, I never lost the wonder, let me put it that way, that I, as a farm boy, would have the privilege of preaching from that pulpit. Now, when I came to Moody Church, one of the things I realized is that we have to help people to understand that we're not just a set of walls, into which people come on Sunday and then leave. So we began a number of ministries in the community, and some of them have spawned and have continued on in marvelous ways. So the whole point, of course, though, is to be gospel-centered, but also to ask the question, how do we relate to the present culture? Which brings us to the book that we're talking about, No Reason to Hide.
Very critical, and I appreciate that. It's great background, and especially you can't think, I don't think any evangelical especially could think about the city of Chicago and not think about Dwight L. Moody, not think about Moody Church or the Moody Bible Institute, that has been a long-standing institution that has had such a critical impact on the city historically. And when I think about churches engaging, I mean, there's so many different churches around America that we can think of, but such a critical history of engaging the culture. It wasn't just within the four walls of the church, but Moody had such a tremendous impact on the city and the culture surrounding it. So thank you for that.
And that's why Moody Bible Institute was begun. It was begun as a school with the direct intention of training young people and others to share the gospel and to live out the gospel. So Moody had a great burden. People may not know this, but he began some other schools in New England, in Northfield, Massachusetts. And I once wrote an article in which all the different nationalities and ethnicities were in this school. You have to understand that Moody was ahead of his time. There were indigenous peoples, there were black students. Moody really broke out of the mold that was popular at that time, and what a marvelous ministry he had.
Absolutely incredible, and a huge influence too on Liberty University and our founder, Dr. Falwell, who in training Champions for Christ, we've literally are educating students not only here across the United States, all 50 states, but literally around the world. And that model was already laid out long ago, and I'm so thankful that Liberty has followed in those same steps. Dr. Lutzer, so I want to get back then to the book, No Reason to Hide. First of all, obviously, we are experiencing this kind of deconstruction and demonization in our culture. So many of the sort of woke forces, if you will, whether it be the sexual revolution, whether it be the sort of racial diversity sort of delusion that has come along, so many things that seem to be vying for the interest of the American people, and certainly hatred, wokeism sort of seems to thrive on that. Through this cultural demonization, there is pressure on the church to sort of kowtow and one way to sort of capitulate and say, this is now the gospel. For others, Dr. Lutzer, I think that there's a temptation to say, no, we must be completely separate. Let's not engage with any of that. Let's just preach the gospel. And then you have that rare group, and I think this is the third category. I think you fit into this category, and there have been others who are boldly speaking out and saying, that's not the gospel. Oh yeah, and preaching the gospel requires us to not just talk about spiritual issues, but to drive into the culture and to speak about these issues as well.
You know, Ryan, you've laid out several different issues, and we're going to have to take them one at a time. But first of all, with regard to wokeism, people don't understand the influence of cultural Marxism. Cultural Marxism says we can have a Marxist state without a bloody revolution as long as we take over the institutions. And Marx believed that the only reason that people do evil is because of oppression. He wanted to destroy the family because the family was a unit of oppression. Men oppressed their wives, parents oppressed their children, and took them to church, and God was the ultimate oppressor. So what happened is Saul Alinsky here in the city of Chicago discovered that this model could be applied to race. And therefore, what he could do is divide the races intentionally. Remember, this is intentional, so that chaos could be created, so that you'd have one group turning against the other. It used to be many years ago when I began at Moody Church, we were into racial reconciliation and were making a lot of progress. And then critical race theory came along and destroyed everything. Because now suddenly people are being judged once again by the color of their skin and not the content of their character, as Martin Luther King wanted people to do. So we're living at a time here when things are being torn apart. Now, you mentioned churches that relate and that actually give the culture whatever the culture wants, even evangelical churches.
Yes.
In my book that we're talking about, I have a chapter on the leftists, that is to say, the Christian left. And there are two ways that the church is submitting to culture on this level. The first is, through critical race theory, social justice. Oh, this is so critical. I give a lot of attention to this in the book, because remember this, anything can become a justice issue in the eyes of people. So you have such things as marriage justice. You have immigration justice. You have abortion justice, which is called health care. And anything can be called just. Remember this in the book of Judges, it says that people did what was right or just in their own eyes. Biblical justice is not like that. I should have looked up this passage earlier. I think it's in Isaiah chapter 56, where it says, justice stands afar off and righteousness is not allowed to enter, because truth is not welcomed in the public square. So justice has to be based on truth. But what you have is the church buying into all of these theories under the general model of social justice, which is, of course, contrary to Scripture. The other way that the church is submitting is through a false view of love. So same-sex marriages being accepted in some churches, because shouldn't we all be loving? Oh, Ryan, this is so critical. Love can be evil. When Adam and Eve fell in the garden, they didn't stop loving. They just started to love the wrong things. Lovers of pleasure, lovers of self, lovers of money. So here you have an unbiblical view of justice applied to social justice. You also have an unbiblical view of love, which people think is an opportunity to bypass the truth of Scripture. To retain that balance is absolutely critical. Now, there's one other comment that you made. I'm trying to remember all of the things that you said. There are many churches that retreat and say, what we're going to do is to just preach the gospel. Now, preaching the gospel, of course, is central. It is more
Yes.
important than politics. But please don't tell me that politics isn't important. How would you like to, for those who want to say, we just want to preach the gospel, or the person who says, only the gospel can change America. Well, yes, but isn't that interesting? Does that mean that politics isn't important? What if you had to make a choice? Would you like to live in North Korea or South Korea? Because after all, it wouldn't matter, because only the gospel can save Korea. It's amazing the number of Christians who very quickly would say South Korea. Why? Because the politics is very different. So politics is not supremely important, but it is very, very important. And then the other thing is nationalism. Well, we don't want to become nationalistic Christians. Well, of course, there's a false view of nationalism, but is patriotism okay? Is it all right if you honor the flag? Now, coming from Canada, I'm a naturalized citizen, but I have to tell you, even before I became a citizen here, when I lived here on a green card, which was the eventual way in which I got into the United States, even then, if I was at an event and the national anthem was sung, I stood, I put my hand on my heart, even though I was not an American citizen. So does that mean that we are submitting to the culture and becoming nationalistic? I just want to pour out my heart in this sentence, and then you go on to your next question, Ryan, and that is this, that there's so many naive people out there who think that if America is destroyed, they won't lose a lot. America is a beacon of hope for the world. And to think that we can lose America without destroying anything important is incredible. Even socialism is a biblical issue. I point out in a previous book I wrote how that socialism of necessity takes parasites, or I should say, socialism of necessity is something that takes people and makes them parasites. It's a paradise. Here's the phrase: socialism is a paradise for parasites. And here's the point, Ryan, people don't realize this. I've been in different parts of the world, not many different countries, but in some Russian countries, the Soviet Union. Any ministry that takes place outside of the United States, most of the money comes from the United States. Why? Because capitalism, of course, capitalism is full of greedy people. But do you think that greed will end if we become socialistic? Of course not.
Right.
But here's the point. America's had this great influence for the cause of good and the gospel. So we have to weep for this nation. We have to preach the gospel, but we also have to educate people regarding the controlling realities of the culture. And that's, of course, where some of us feel that there has been a neglect.
Yes. So well said. I'm going to make mention, Dr. Lutzer, of two men more recently that I learned from and on two different fronts. One is Pastor Andrew Brunson, who was made famous, of course, during the Trump administration, rescued from a Turkish prison. He was being persecuted for the faith. And I had the opportunity to interview him more recently about persecution. And he said so many American evangelicals have a naivety when it comes to persecution, because for many of them, they've not languished in a prison, they've not experienced that kind of political pressure and the pressure of a justice system that is bent not towards truth, as you say, but is bent ideologically in order to silence believers, and not only that, but to put them to death, as an enemy of the state. And he was just saying that the gospel does not flourish in countries where there is not freedom. Now, we know when we study church history, Tertullian, a church father, famously said the blood of the martyrs was the seed of the church, that God, in spite of tremendous persecution in those early centuries, continued to grow the church in the midst of that persecution. And I know your book addresses suffering, and we'll get to that. But what he was saying was, though, that there is a great deal of suppression that takes place, that the church is not then free to be a resource, that oftentimes in the midst of persecution, the church becomes inwardly focused. It can't train up missionaries, send missionaries, take collection of financial support, send it around the world. That North Korea might have Christians there, but they're not resourcing other parts of the world. And we're praying for them. We're trying to get resources to them. We're trying to support them in any way that they can, but a church that is experiencing that is not going to be a place that is then free to share the gospel and to resource others. So that's on one front. And then on another front, Os Guinness said something more recently. I had the opportunity to go see him, and he delivered a talk. And he said, it's an old Rudyard Kipling quote. He says, what do they know of England who only England know? And he quoted that several times. That is to say, if we only know America and what it's like to be American, and I think that's so much of the ignorance of students living in this country, third and fourth generation, not coming from immigrant families, not becoming naturalized citizens like yourself. If they only know of America and nothing else of anywhere else in the world, what do they really know about America? Because they don't understand it, its complexity, or in its comparison to other nations around the world. And so much of the people that deal in this sort of grievance industry, if you will, this that sort of daily deal in the diversity delusion, or I like to call it division, inequity, exclusion, DIE, die. They're peddling this, but largely on ignorant, unsuspecting minds who don't understand the greatness of this country or the uniqueness of this country. Not exceptional people, but exceptional ideas. I will say it like that. We're not exceptional in that we don't share in the sin of Adam. We all do, but we're exceptional in the ideas that were promoted here for such a long time. And if we don't retain those, we're going to lose freedom.
Well, what you've said is absolutely true. And by the way, what Brunson said about North Korea, that is so critical. We have Christians who think, well, the best thing that could happen to the church is persecution. Well, we should expect it. As you mentioned in my book, No Reason to Hide, I have an entire chapter on the issue of persecution and suffering. But at the same time, if our freedoms are taken away, the church in North Korea, there may be believers there, but they certainly are not a sending church doing missionary work elsewhere. And to your point about the United States, this is what really breaks my heart. What children are taught today in our universities and in our schools is this: you are perfect, but America is ugly. And they don't realize that the ugliness exists in every single human heart. And when you think of America in relation to other countries, the fact is that America has come so far that I will go on saying that I think that America is probably the least racist country in the whole world. In America, all that we can do is to see the faults. And that's, of course, what much of education is all about. And of course, America is an imperfect country. It will always be imperfect. But when you stop to think and compare it with other countries, then everything changes. And of course, if I might go back to Marxism again, which is kind of where we began,
please.
Marx emphasized the fact that the only reason that there are some people who are poor is because of oppression. America is the richest country in the world. That means it got its riches illegally. America owes the world. So what we have to do is to make sure that America pays its fair share when it comes to the war, of course, in the Ukraine. America has to pay its fair share when it comes to climate change and climate control. Because after all, because we are the wealthiest country, we must be an evil country. And we owe the world because we got our riches on the backs of the poor countries. So these kinds of ideas are seeping into our culture. Is it any wonder that so many children grow up hating America? Tragic, it's deserving of tears, it's deserving of repentance.
Wow, incredible. I totally agree. I want to get to something you just mentioned. You made mention of it. It is a chapter in your book, but talking about the greatest lie, our nation's most cherished delusion. I think of being a child and going back to PBS, public broadcasting, and watching Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. And at a time, I think, maybe in the 60s and 70s, I'm not a kid of the 60s and 70s, I'm a kid of the 80s, but he said something. He oftentimes would try to promote sort of the positive self-image and positive worldview. This is where his kind of theology was coming through as a Presbyterian pastor. But he would oftentimes talk about how special each child was, and I think you can be whatever you want to be. That has kind of been taken, and it's become this hairy demon monster in this country of sort of the sexual revolution and queer theory and this whole deconstruction. The critical theorists have sort of taken that to the ultimate extreme, where you define every bit of truth and reality, and it's a self-imaging where you can literally be, Dr. Lutzer, whatever you want to be, and make the rest of the world fall under this delusion.
Well, first of all, let me say, I think it's perfectly fine to tell a child that you are special, but you should not tell a child you can be whatever you want to be. Now, in my book, No Reason to Hide, as you mentioned, I have a chapter on the greatest delusion, the greatest lie, and that began in the Garden of Eden when Satan promised Adam and Eve that if they took of the fruit of the forbidden tree, they would be like God. So what has happened, Ryan, and this is so critical for people to understand, now suddenly we all become our own gods, and you become whatever you want to be. There are doctors now who are suggesting that when a baby is born, we should not call it a boy or a girl because we don't know what the child is going to choose. So let's call everybody they. Can you imagine? A couple has a new baby and the grandparents are saying, is it a boy or a girl? We have a they. This is insanity. In the book of Romans, it says that God gives people over to a reprobate mind. Why? Because they did not worship and serve the Creator, but rather the creation. So the idea that somehow I can determine my own future is just the most disastrous thing you can possibly think of. In my book, I use the illustration given by John Stonestreet, who said, imagine if you're lost in a city and you have a magnet and you have a compass, it points north. So then you can get your bearing, you know which direction you're going and so forth. But let's suppose you have a magnet in your backpack. So your compass always points to yourself. You have no idea whether you're going in circles. You have no idea whether or not you're in the same place where you once were. You have no specific destination. It's like flying a plane and there are no runways, no place where you can get off. It's all up to you. Is it any wonder so many children are contemplating suicide and what have you, and then you have the breakup of the home and all? So I did want to get to this, Ryan. In my chapter where I discuss transgenderism, what do parents say if a child comes home and says, I think I'm trans? What we have to do is to help our children to understand that self-perception can be totally wrong. You can go into a psych ward and you can meet somebody who genuinely believes that he is Napoleon, but that doesn't make him so. The illustration that I use in the book is of a young woman who has anorexia. She looks in the mirror and she says to herself, I'm overweight. In point of fact, she's starving herself to death. Now, we say, well, only she knows who she really is, so we just have to support her delusion. The answer is no. She doesn't have a body problem. She has a mind problem. Now, there may be 1 in 10,000, 1 in 30,000 who may genuinely have gender dysphoria. But when you have children in high school and so forth all saying that they have gender dysphoria, therefore they are switching genders, you know that the devastation is huge. They do not have a body problem, they have a mind problem, and we have to help them see that. And the tragedy of this idea that you can be whoever you want to be. Here's a child who feels guilty because of what he's taught in school. He's shown perversity. In my book, I refer to a book used here in the state of Illinois in the public school system, horrible. Here's a child who feels guilty. He knows it's not normal, but he is told that it is as he's introduced to these various forms of sexuality. And then he gets depressed. And then somebody says, well, you know why you're depressed? You must be trans. We are living in a nation of deception. And here's the thing, our elites believe that education, the education of children, is too important a task to be left to parents. Now, true education means that the values of the parents should be communicated to the child. And if they loan the child out, well, yes, that's perfectly fine, as long as those values from the home are being reinforced. But that's not how modern educators see it. They need to break from their parents' values. They need to be educated on their own with those kinds of ideas that are woke and very destructive. You know that there is a parallel. And I also wrote, you may not know this, Ryan, but I wrote a book on Hitler entitled Hitler's Cross. And when I
have that book, yes.
All right. When I studied, Hitler, and you look at the curriculum, students were told, you have to make up your own mind about your values. And of course, those values that they were taught were very different than the values of their parents. But students were not really making up their own mind. Teachers were following the curriculum. And the phrase, make up your own mind, is code for saying you have to reject everything that your parents told you, and you have to accept whatever we tell you, you must accept. And so it's not a matter of students making up their own mind. The curriculum determines what they are going to be thinking.
That's right. Dr. Lutzer, we just have a few moments left. This has been an incredible show, by the way. Again, Ryan Helfenbein, Executive Director of the Freedom Center, the Standing for Freedom Center at Liberty University. It has been such an honor to host for Jenna Ellis and to have the venerable Dr. Erwin Lutzer, former senior pastor of the Moody Church in Chicago. Just final comment. What are some practical steps to get through this? I think, I'm thinking of individual Christians. I'm thinking of maybe a church or even a group of churches unified in biblical truth. How do we do this in the final moments?
In answer to your question, every Christian has to answer that differently. For example, a teacher in the public school system here in Chicago told me he was told it is not enough for you to simply tolerate same-sex marriage. If you don't celebrate it, you could lose your job. Okay, for him, there's a line in the sand. He cannot celebrate what God has condemned, okay? So that for him, what does he do? If he's going to lose his job, he's going to lose his job because his integrity and conscience before God is even more important than his job. But the other question, Ryan, is the rest of the church going to rally around him and say, we're going to help you through this because you have a wife and family to support? We're going to even have to rethink what church is all about. To the businessman, well, what do you do when you have a diversity statement? One was sent to me the other day. Somebody texted it to me and said, can a Christian sign this? And I read it and I said, no, there are parts that you might be able to sign, but not all of it. So there you go. For the Christian businessman, where is his line in the sand? And you say, well, he could lose his job. I've met people who've lost their job because of their integrity. But Jesus said, blessed are you when men revile you and persecute you and say all manner of evil against you falsely for my sake. So, Ryan, this gets back to the previous point that we were making regarding persecution. The time is going to come when people are going to have to say, believers, my integrity and my beliefs and my conscience and faithfulness to God even supersedes my job. And in Nazi Germany, there were some families that lived that way. They were marginalized, they were persecuted. But in 100 years or less, when we look back, we say, which families were the wisest? They are the ones who stood for God and took the consequences. So in answer to your question, now, if you ask the question regarding the church and the pastor, what we need to do is we don't have to endorse a political candidate or a political party, but we have to speak about issues that are sometimes deemed political, but today everything is political. Abortion is political, transgenderism, same-sex marriage. So those are issues. They aren't the only issues, but those are the issues to which we must speak, because Jesus said, you are in the world, but you're not to be of the world. And that's our challenge.
Thank you, Dr. Lutzer. The book is called No Reason to Hide, Standing for Christ in a Collapsing Culture. We'll leave it there. Thank you so much for joining the Jenna Ellis Show.
Thank you so much. God bless you, Ryan.
Legacy Precious Metals is the company that I trust to give you good and patient counsel for investing in your retirement. The Biden administration has caused a financial crisis, and they have no clue how to fix it. Oil prices have skyrocketed, and when oil prices go up, not only do your expenses go up, but the cost of transportation and shipping spikes, leading the prices of goods to rise. And we are already seeing record inflation. That's the last thing that we need. Our economy is in trouble, and you need to take steps to protect yourself. If all your money is tied up in stocks, bonds, and traditional markets, you may be vulnerable. So gold is one of the very best ways to protect your retirement. No matter what happens, you own your own gold. It's real, it's physical, and it's always been valuable since the dawn of time. Call Legacy Precious Metals today at 866-528-1903 or visit them online at legacypminvestments.com. That's legacypminvestments.com, where you can download the free investor's guide. You can also go to my Facebook page, Jenna Ellis. I am a public figure on Facebook, and I just posted yesterday a really great interview with the president of Legacy Precious Metals, who is discussing why you need to start your retirement account even if you're in your 20s or 30s. There is always a great time to protect your retirement and invest, just like you want to protect your health over the long term. So go to Legacy Precious Metals at legacypminvestments.com or call 866-528-1903. I am so excited to share with you a new social media platform that I have joined called Wimkin. Wimkin is a new free speech social media platform that is at the forefront of the war on free speech. Wimkin offers all of the features of Facebook, YouTube, TikTok, and more, but from a conservative, patriotic founder. So you don't have to worry about data privacy or censorship when posting or accessing your content. You may not have heard of them yet, as they've been banned by the App Store for months, while at the #1 spot in social networking on Google Play and Apple. But Wimkin has fought those bans and won, without compromising free speech and American values. They've been shut down by server providers and subpoenaed by the January 6th committee, squashed by PayPal, their financial institutions, and more. But Wimkin is still standing firm and growing fast. So join me and nearly 9 million of your fellow patriots by creating your free profile today. So take it from me, Wimkin is the real deal. The platform acts like a Facebook, YouTube, TikTok, and Twitter combined, but with true freedom of speech and full data privacy. So join me and download Wimkin today, and you can find them in Google Play or the Apple App Store or wimkin.com. That's WIMKIN.com. And as a bonus feature, you can stream my show, The Jenna Ellis Show, on Wimkin starting now.